Without firm confirmation of peace talks and the right people at the table, is the U.S.-Israel war in Iran doomed to escalate? Iran's foreign ministry says the U.S. is not serious about pursuing diplomacy, even while the White House insists they're inches away from a deal. So need the world brace itself for the worst as the destabilization of the Strait of Hormuz and the global economy continues. I'm Andrea Sankey, and this is the Newsmakers. Well, it's incredibly difficult to keep up with what's happening in the U.S.-Israeli war on Iran. Every time the White House makes an announcement, Iran says something different, or President Trump seems to change his mind a short time later. But whatever the mixed messaging, traffic in the Strait of Hormuz remains highly restricted, or even at a standstill, with shots fired at a number of vessels by both the Iranian and U.S. navies. And it's keeping the global economy in chaos, with some analysts saying the negative effects of this war could soon be locked in for the long term. Here's a look.
Where once the world's oil flowed through, there are now gunshots. On Sunday, the US Navy fired and seized an Iranian-flagged cargo ship near the Strait of Hormuz. Washington's blockade of Iranian ports is in force, but so is Iran's closure of the critical waterway. Vessels trying to pass the strait have come under Iranian fire, including an Indian tanker carrying oil from Iraq. According to multiple media outlets, this is a recording of the Indian tanker captain pleading with the Iranian Navy to stop shooting and allow it to turn around.
You are fighting now, let me turn back.
According to Indian media outlets, the vessel was allowed to turn back, no injuries were reported, and the vessel was not damaged. US President Donald Trump called it a total violation of the ceasefire. He said the US negotiators will be in Pakistan on Monday for the second round of talks. And if Iran does not agree a deal, Trump has once again threatened to destroy the country's civil infrastructure. But the Iranian Foreign Ministry said early Monday that the US is not interested in diplomacy, and it remains unclear whether an Iranian delegation will travel to Islamabad. The Foreign Ministry said the country has no plans for the next round of talks, accusing the US of violating the truce since the beginning.
We truly do not see any serious signs of resolve on the part of the United States. On the contrary, there are repeated and numerous indications that no seriousness exists in the US when it comes to advancing diplomacy in its real, conventional sense, rather than diplomacy that means issuing dictates.
The Iranian military is now vowing retaliation after the US capture of the Iranian ship, and officials still maintain that Tehran has got the upper hand in the conflict.
We hold the advantage. We have not struck many of the targets. In other words, we have left some more important matters for later stages. And if matters return to war, we hold the upper hand. We can stop oil production. We can shut down 15 million barrels of oil a day and keep it suspended for an entire year.
That could have devastating effects on the global economy. Countries around the world have already been grappling with soaring fuel prices, yet a prolonged war could have a domino effect. Flights could be cancelled due to jet fuel shortages. The World Bank warns that destruction in fertilizer supplies threatens to trigger a food crisis and push millions into hunger. Rising energy costs and restrictions in the Strait of Hormuz could even lead to a medicine shortage. The IMF is warning of a global recession if the war on Iran worsens. It's a worst-case scenario that's still on the table. The sides are still deeply apart on key issues, and threats of renewed attacks continue, and the world is witnessing an all-round crisis unfolding.
So with the 2-week ceasefire, for whatever it's worth, set to expire imminently, how much danger is the region and the world really in? Well, joining me now to debate that and more are from Doha, founding director of the Arab Perspective Institute, Zeidon Alkinani. From Tehran, associate professor of world studies at the University of Tehran, Foad Izadi. And from Washington, director of the Future of DHS project at the Atlantic Council, Thomas Warwick, thanks all so much for being with me. Zeidon, first, will we see talks take place before this ceasefire expires, and do you have a clear idea as to who's actually heading to Islamabad?
Well, the talks never stopped. They were never stalled. I think back-channel communications, as the Iranians framed it, have always been taking place, even since the start of the war. I think the official element of the talks, as they are trying to label it in the lead-up to round 2 of Islamabad, is the question. I'm pretty sure the Pakistani mediation efforts will still be ongoing. We've always used to seeing different tiers of negotiators. If it's a tier 1 negotiator, such as J.D. Vance in the U.S. case, then that's considered to be an official negotiation framework. If it's tier 2 or tier 3, then that might be considered as a back-channel communication. Efforts in ensuring that reconciliation and talks and solutions on the table from both the American and the Iranian side is certainly an interest of them, given the political and the economic repercussions both sides are facing. It's a matter of who would want to raise the white flag symbolically first, in order to ensure that the other side is seen as being the symbolically victorious side to their own domestic political pressures, questioning and providing accountability of their ability to continue this war.
Interesting. But I mean, are back-channel communications really the best they can do, or do the right people have to be at the table? And I mean, the right people have to be at the table, and do you think they will be to actually get a lasting deal?
It certainly isn't ideal to have these back-channel communications, but one cannot undermine the direct pressures both sides are facing, given that the war is ongoing. Many of the political developments and the military achievements or defeats on the ground are directly impacting the status quo of the war. I don't think the Iranians imagined that they would be able to survive this long, despite the destruction and the direct attacks on their infrastructure. This is perhaps why there has been a sudden increase or a gradual increase of confidence in their negotiation tactics, obviously facing the maximalist pressures from the U.S. In this war.
Okay, Foad, it's interesting because Iran seems to be less worried, so to speak, about the effects on the global economy via blocking the Strait of Hormuz. It mostly affects Iranian adversaries more than it would really affect Iran. Iran has seemed to have learned to adapt arguably better than others because possibly of many years of experience under heavy sanctions. So how close are we then to locking in the negative effects of this war for the long term globally? Or do you believe negotiations can somehow still pull us all back from the brink?
I think negotiations can be very helpful if they're actually negotiations. Iran was attacked in the middle of negotiations 2 times already. They were not negotiations, they were deception operations. This time around, the U.S. didn't attack Iran in the middle of negotiations. They blockaded Iran 24 hours after the end of negotiations. That is illegal under international law. Blockades under international law is an act of war. And when you are actually negotiating, you're supposed to do it with good faith. Good faith, I'm quoting. And good faith negotiations means that you don't shoot at the other side and you lower rhetoric. And what we have been seeing from the United States is that they're taking over Iranian ships and shooting at them. And Trump uses profanity when he tweets about Iran. So there are a lot of people here that think it is a waste of time.
Well, then let me ask Thomas Warwick what you make of the prospect for the locking in the negative effects of this war. I've heard a number of analysts, especially economists, warn that if it's not straightened out soon, the damage almost can't be undone. We're talking about the domino effects of everything from fertilizer causing food crises, oil, of course. We've already seen the effects on many countries, especially in Asia. Where do you stand?
Well, greetings to you and to your other guests and to the viewers. Clearly, this war is going to end, and almost all wars end through diplomacy, including this one. And it's only a question of how much diplomacy will be required to end the war. We've seen interest from the United States in having a further round of negotiations in Islamabad, Pakistan. There's doubt as of the hour that we're recording this whether the Iranian side will even show up. My guess is eventually they will, maybe not the first day, but perhaps on a second or third day, because the optic of a negotiating table with the Americans sitting there ready to do a deal and Iran not even willing to come to the table are obviously extremely negative for the prospects for military action, for the world economy, as you said. And I think there will be pressure from China and other countries to say to Iran, you must at least come to the table.
Okay, both of you have described why negotiations may or may not work. But Tom, I'll ask again, when do we know if the damage done is beyond repair, if we're going to see that long-term damage that leads us to the kind of global recession, potentially global depression that we've heard so much talk and fear of?
Well, you can't say beyond repair. That's never the way the world economy works. Yes, there is a hit to global GDP. Yes, there are deals and businesses that are not done. And yes, there are disruptions to people trying to buy petrol and fertilizer and other ordinary substances. But it's an adaptive world. Just as Iran is adaptive, so is the United States and every other country. And the world will adapt, even if everyone is worse off as a result of a war and a blockade by both sides of the Strait of Hormuz.
Okay.
Things will get back to normal at some point. The question is when.
Yeah, that's the big question, because, Zeidon, I'll put it to you. I mean, when we talk about the domino effect, we're hearing flights canceled due to jet fuel shortages, the World Bank saying disruptions in fertilizer could lead to millions being dragged into hunger, rising energy costs even causing medicine shortages. I mean, how likely are those dominoes to fall if we don't get these negotiations sorted out and a real resolution?
I think the fall will be very detrimental. I perhaps agree with Thomas. Nothing is beyond repair. However, the economic implications may not mean that the repair will reflect or translate things to be back to how they were. Even if we were to imagine a political settlement between all the parties involved in this conflict, economic alternatives to the routes that were impacted or even politically leveraged by certain actors in this war, especially such as the example of how the Iranian government leveraged the Strait of Hormuz as a political pressure in this card. Different economic routes, different economic alternatives will be considered and recognized by regional actors in the region. There's already been talks in the Antalya Diplomacy Forum about potential routes between Turkey, Syria, and Saudi Arabia. There's always been similar conversations taking place from an Iraqi economic perspective, and even beyond the region. There's a lot of expectations that European investments and Chinese investments will also find this as an opportunity to replace some of the leaving gaps that U.S. investments might be leaving behind them in the region, given the increasing mistrust, not just politically, but also economically in the future.
Okay. Let me ask Fawad, though, if there is a real risk for Iran here, that it might hurt its allies, or at least those it had agreements with in the Strait of Hormuz, simply by making mistakes in the strait itself. We know about there's been some firing on what were supposed to be friendly ships, 2 Indian-flagged tankers over the weekend. Is there a real risk here? Does that concern you?
I don't think so. I think countries realized that the Strait of Hormuz was open 2 months ago, before Israelis and Americans started this illegal war. there was a deal available according to the Omani foreign minister. He said an agreement is available within 24 hours. Trump decided to start this war. And we have people like Jake Sullivan, the former national security advisor, saying that Kushner and Witkoff did not understand the offer that Iran was presenting to them. The hope that Iranians have is that they understand more this time. And the hope they have is that they are actually interested in a deal, not capitulation. And the way Americans are acting, it proves to the Iranians that they are not interested in a deal. They want to take over Iranian oil. This is what Trump said, speaking to Financial Times the other day. And when a reporter asked him, why do you want to take over Iranian oil? He said that he's a businessman and he wants to make money. So when you're dealing with the Epstein class in this manner, you are not going to be able to do normal diplomacy. And it would be foolish for any Iranian politician to go to Istanbul, go to Islamabad, and engage in these type of back and forth when the other side is not serious.
Tom, I know you've argued that the United States has been, I guess, what you think is the more genuine broker in these negotiations. But let me ask you, President Trump had said at one point Iran would not close the Strait of Hormuz again. That obviously didn't happen, among other things that he stated very clearly. We know much of what he said and what he's posted has been completely untrue. So when does this become kind of the boy who cried wolf at some point, that any statement that the White House issues only becomes kind of a liability rather than bringing clarity and complicating real negotiations further?
Well, both sides have played games. You had the Iranian foreign minister saying the strait was open. You had the Revolutionary Guards saying the strait was closed. You had President Trump saying both of those things in the same social media post. President Trump's negotiating style is very different from every American president in living memory. And he believes that uncertainty, he believes that keeping his opponent off balance, he believes that using credible threats is the way to get people to do what he wants to do. That's the way he ran his business. That's the way he runs U.S. foreign policy. So this is simply the reality of the way this president negotiates. The challenge is that he believes coming to the table and doing a deal is done with him. He is a strong leader who wants to deal with other strong leaders like President Erdogan, like President El-Sisi, Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. And he's looking for somebody on the Iranian side who is prepared to do a deal on similar terms. And what we have not yet seen is the gap between the American and the Iranian positions, especially on the nuclear file, get to the point where a deal is possible.
Okay, Tom, can I just
at the
ask
stage
you there?
where
I mean,
Iran says five.
It's kind of a bit disturbing, if I'm not misinterpreting what you're saying, that you think Iran should meet Trump's standard, because many would argue it is Trump's standard of negotiation or deal-making that's been incredibly problematic and counterproductive.
Well, we could all have a very fun discussion over what Iranian negotiating styles are like, because they have their own peculiar characteristics. And this is part of the problem. There is a huge cultural misunderstanding between Iranian and American negotiators. This was apparent in Geneva. It's been apparent in Islamabad. And it is striking to me that there is not more of an effort by both sides to understand that the negotiating styles of the other are one of the reasons holding back a deal that would benefit everyone.
Zeidon, what do you make of that?
I think one of the major achievements that the Iranian regime has been able to gain from this war, despite the fundamental and significant military strikes and the decapitation of the political leadership, is that it has been able to receive an unrecognizable international and regional sympathy because of the way the war was implemented against it, which has also undermined and allowed people in the region as well to forget the interventionist regional proxy politics that Iran has conducted in the region. But given the way the US believed that it had the right and the impunity to conduct such a war that followed an Israel first and an Israel only oriented policy against Iran, has made the region take a step back, including regional actors that have had animosity and hostility towards the Iranian regime, even in the last few months in the lead up to the war, reassess their security arrangements, reassess their considerations of who their ally and who their enemy is. When we do criticize the way the United States conducted this war against Iran, it does not mean we're not recognizing Iran's previous interventionist regional proxy politics in the region prior to February 28th. However, the solution is certainly not further Israeli regional hegemony, and the solution is certainly also not US decision-making that ignores the consultation of regional actors and ignores the economic and the political consequences this might mean to the region, similarly to previous actions that were conducted in the US invasion of Iraq and many other examples.
Foad, go ahead.
Yeah, we don't have a regime here. It's a government. Iranians established the government, the first in the world, about 5,000 years ago. People who established the government in the 1970s should not forget that. We have a country that's victim of two nuclear regimes attacking it, and what Iranian government officials need to make sure is that this is the end of it. And they're going to use all leverage they have to make sure that the country survives. Iran has lost more than 3,200 civilians, including 165 little girls, when their school was attacked on the first day of war. The Iranians will teach Netanyahu and Trump that dealing with Iran is not New York real estate type of deals. Iranian government official will make sure that the country survives, and Iran will survive many years after the Epstein class has destroyed the United States.
Tom, final question for you. We just have a few minutes left, because we know this declaring war on Iran has disrupted lives around the world. You know, most of it is the problem with the Strait of Hormuz disrupting oil supplies and crucial shipments globally. But you had argued at one point that it was China who really had to worry about this disruption. But now we're seeing, and the number of economists are arguing, that other than having to adjust their GDP by 1% or so, they're actually in a much better position than the United States, according to, as I said, a number of economic indicators. So it's the Americans that are genuinely worried about their domestic economy as well as the global economy. Do you agree there, or do you still think it's China that's going to pay the highest economic price?
Well, the reality is that for the United States, gasoline prices going up by 60 cents to $1 is, an obvious undesirable outcome. The problem in East Asia right now is they don't have any oil or kerosene or petrol at any price. And so in countries like China, India, South Korea, and Japan, they're starting to face more serious concerns that can't be measured just simply by knocking a point off of your GDP growth.
So do you expect them to put some more pressure on Iran?
I've said here,
Beijing? Would you expect Beijing then to put, yeah?
Yes, they will eventually. Yes, because China gets nothing out of this war at all. Its influence with Tehran does not increase. The fact that other Gulf Arab countries are unable to get their oil to East Asian markets does not help anyone. And so this truly is a case where economic pressure is going to be on Tehran more than almost anyone else to come to a deal, at least on the Strait of Hormuz. But the one thing I do have to say about your dire economic picture is President Trump believes that an Iranian nuclear weapon must be prevented, and that the kinds of disruptions we're seeing right now are insignificant compared to what an Iranian nuclear weapon would produce. Even if it's never used, it would still prompt Arab countries to build their own nuclear weapons, and very quickly the world will be a much, much more dangerous place.
Okay,
So to President Trump, the world's choice is
it's
very
just,
different.
as you know, many people don't buy into the argument that we should all have been ever in fear of Iran's nuclear program, and that's what the JCPOA was there for, to control that. But okay, very unfortunately, we're completely out of time. So I'd like to sincerely thank all three of you, as always, for being with me, and our viewers for joining us as well. Remember, you can follow us on social media, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.